Welcome to the Financial Freedom Mastermind Group podcast. Here we're all about breaking free from the 40 to 50 year work grind and accelerating our journey towards financial freedom. Join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern as we explore different types of investments that can fast track your path to financial independence. We serve as a hub for connecting with fellow members during our sessions so you can share successes, ask questions, and keep the momentum going.
And so I'll start with this. What if I told you you could live for free? What if I told you you could eliminate your single largest monthly expense with one decision? What if I told you that the same decision could turn your biggest bill into your greatest wealth building vehicle? Here's why I know this works. I lived it. In 2016, I was working for a medical device company that was in the Fortune 500, but I started there as an intern, literally started from the bottom. Around that time, I started listening to podcasts like Bigger Pockets. I got back into reading and picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad and The Richest Man in Babylon. And books helped rewire my mindset around money. But here's the thing. They told me what to think, not how to start. When I got promoted, I moved to Louisville, Kentucky and became a device rep out in the field. And I found myself a brand new, amazing apartment. It was a 2-bed, 2-bath right next to the pool. And I was paying about $1,200 a month. And everybody who came over said, wow, this place is amazing. I can't believe it's so affordable and cheap. But when I sat down and actually looked at my budget, something hit me. It wasn't gas eating up my paycheck. It wasn't food. I could have literally eaten out every single day of the week and it still wouldn't have touched what I was paying for rent. Rent was my largest expense by far on a monthly basis. And that's when I came across a term that changed my life. And that term is house hacking. So I wanted to define what house hacking is before we dive into how it changed my life and what it can do for you. And so house hacking means that you live in a property and you rent out another portion of that property. There's many ways to do a house hack, right? One of the ways is if you buy a duplex, triplex, quadplex, live in one unit, rent the others out. Another way is to buy a single family or a condo and rent another bedroom out. Another way is to rent a room inside somebody else's house to lower your cost of living. All of these are considered house hacking. And here's what people don't realize is that you're already house hacking even if you weren't using the term. You just don't own anything. When you rent an apartment, you're one of hundreds of people that are sharing that building that the landlord owns. You pay rent and they build wealth. Now imagine flipping that. You own the building, everyone else pays rent to you, and you live there for free. That's the only difference between what you're currently doing and getting into house hack is the ownership. Who owns all the benefits that are coming with that? And here's where it gets powerful. The money that you were spending on renting now goes towards saving for your next investment. And so when I understood this concept, it burned in my mind for about a year before I took action. And at 24 years old, I actually took everything that I had saved up, which was roughly $5,000, and I put that down on a $190,000 triplex. I used an FHA loan, which allows you to put down 3.5%, and I negotiated for the seller to cover all of my closing costs, which is roughly about 3% of the purchase price. And so I walked in with just a down payment. I moved into one of the units, and the other 2 units were bringing in roughly $1,400 a month. And my mortgage was just $1,350. And so I essentially went from paying $1,200 a month to live in a dope apartment to now owning a triplex, eliminating that biggest expense. So I was not paying $1,200 a month. And I essentially was getting paid $50 a month to live where I was. And so that's a $1,250 swing to where I could now save $1,250 a month and put it toward the next property. And so when you talk about some of the benefits, I really want to work through the numbers here. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start to dive in. And if anybody has any questions, go ahead and hit it in that Q&A. This is like my first time working a webinar, so we'll get better over time as we do this. But when you look at this, right, and you can see my screen, here goes what I was doing before. So before I was renting and I was paying $1,200 per month for my rent. And then when I switched to house hacking, my mortgage was actually higher at $1,350, but my tenants were paying minus $1,400. And so I really was a positive, it's a negative, a positive $50, which is, when you put these two together, a $1,250 swing, which is amazing. Oh, this is negative and this is positive. Yeah, $1,250 swing when you put these two together and kind of see what was going on there because we eliminated this piece. And so when you look at what it would have looked like from a house hack versus an investor, right? And I'm going to show you this. So I gave you the numbers, right? This property in this home was a $190,000 purchase price, 190, and please excuse my chicken scratch, 190K. An investor, at least in the traditional sense, would have had to put down 20% on that property. And 20% of this would have you at $38,000, right? To go and buy that property. And then they would potentially have to cover their closing costs, which is another 3%, which is just under, call it, $6,000, right? So roughly $6,000 they would need to cover in closing costs as well. Really, yeah, $6,000. And so fully to get in this, you're gonna have to pay $43,000. Now I don't know about you, but at 24, saving up $43,000 was not even an option, right? It didn't even seem like it was real. I was barely making over that, right? When I was an intern, I think we made like 60,000 a year. And so I would have definitely, it would have been a struggle to save this much. Saving the 5 grand felt, monumental with all the other bills that I had coming in. And so saving 43,000 would have had me waiting for a very long time. So that's what an investor typically has to pay. The benefit of a house act is when you're going to go buy a primary home to live in, mortgage companies and the government loves this because you help drive a little bit more of the GDP in that neighborhood and that gross value in that neighborhood because you're going to shop in the same neighborhood. You're going to go buy gas in the same neighborhood. You're going to support the local community. And so the government gives you a break when you're putting a down payment on a property and they make it a little bit easier for you to do that. And so with me using that FHA loan, I was able to put down 3.5%, which was roughly $5,000, right? Maybe a little bit more than that, but that's what I had saved down. And then I got some money from the seller. So roughly $5,000 is what I put down. And then I was able to get the seller to cover my closing costs, right? So this is closing cost. Closing costs were zero, okay? And so my total was literally $5,000 down to move into this property. And I was able to then go from paying $1,200 a month to rent to now paying nothing and actually being in the surplus by $50, which actually brought me some dollars, which is cool. Now, bottom line, government and lenders want you to buy a primary home. They incentivize it. House hacking lets you take full advantage of that while building your investment portfolio. And the cool thing about house hacking is you only have to live in that home for up to 1 year. You sign a document saying that you intend, and that's the key word, you intend to live in that home for up to 1 year. But there's certain reasons where maybe that's not possible. So for example, when I bought this triplex in Louisville, I lived in there, right, for roughly 6 months. And then I got promoted by a job to move to Boston. Boston is definitely more than 50 miles away. It's like 1,000 miles away, right? And so when I made that move, it was 6 months in, hey, I got to take this role. And so I was able to move a tenant into my unit and still continue to own that property. And that property was one of my best performers early on because of when I bought it and just, how much it could bring in. When I moved that tenant in, it was bringing in $2,200 on a $1,350 mortgage. And eventually, when I did sell the house in 2021 to buy more real estate, it was bringing in $2,850 on a $1,350 mortgage. And so when you look at that piece, that's one reason you can move is for a job promotion. Another reason is if you're getting married, right? Another reason is if you just recently had a kid or there's been, some change in the family recently. These are all valid reasons for you to have to move a little bit early. For example, I still do house hacks to this day. And now, my wife does it alongside me. And one of the things that we did is just before we got married, while we were still both single, we both purchased individual properties, right, that we moved into because we were still, separate from that standpoint. And then once we got married, which definitely wasn't a full year later, we just purchased a property together as well that we were able to do the same thing, lower down payments and kind of make it happen. And before, the FHA was the only way to get, less than 5% down on a property multiple times, or not multiple times, less than 5% down on a property, at least your initial time or on a primary. But recently, I want to say it was like November of 24, something of that nature, they've now changed the rules. And so you can get a 5% down conventional loan on a personal property once a year. And so you can house hack many, many times for literally just 5% down. When you look at the closing credits, right, with the FHA loan, you're actually allowed to get more credits. If you were going to buy that property as an investor, the maximum amount of seller credits you can get is 2%. Right? With that 20% down conventional investor loan, the max you can get is 2%. Whereas if you are going to go FHA, the max you can get is 6%. And so that 6% can do a couple of things. One, it can cover your full closing costs, right? So closing costs are usually around 3, maybe to 5% if you're paying like some extra points and things of that nature. And with 6% in closing costs, you can pay extra points to get the interest rate down and lower your overall monthly payment and make it an even more favorable deal. And so when you look at the long game on that triplex. I mentioned how much it was renting for when I moved out and what I got it up to. I actually ended up selling that house in 2021 and I sold it for 310K, walking away with a six-figure check, having never paid the mortgage myself, right? So this is just something that saved me money. When I moved out, it made me money. Over the years, it continued to increase from a month-to-month standpoint and how much money it brought in. And at the end of the day, it gave me a six-figure check, which is much more than I was actually making when I initially bought this house. And so that is the power of house hacking. It allows you to get into a property a bit earlier, and it allows you to be able to then turn that property into a money generating asset for you over time. And that's kind of what we're going for. And so you got to define what your win is when it comes to a house hack, right? Not every house hack looks the same. That Louisville triplex was one type, but the real question you need to answer is, what does a win look like for you right now? And the way I would start is, how much are you currently paying for rent or for housing, and use that as your baseline, right? And so, for example, I told you I've done multiple different house hacks. I'm going to share my screen. So when it comes to different kinds of house hacks, that was the triplex, right? So that was one type of house hack where I lived in one unit, rented the others out. When I got promoted for my job, I actually moved to Boston. In Boston, I didn't realize it until I moved there, is one of the most expensive cities in the country, right? Literally, it was top 5. There was like Hawaii, Manhattan, LA, and Boston was up there. And I was like, what the heck? Like, this is where I'm moving to. And so on paper, I was getting a pay raise, but like if you actually looked at the cost of living, it was like a 30 or 40% decrease from what I was paying in Louisville, moving to Boston. And so what I did up there is I did a roommate hack, right? I was looking at so many different properties. I knew like, hey, I didn't want to spend more than say $2,000 a month for my personal rent, at least when I was initially there. And so I looked and found roommates, right? I said, you know what? Like I'm not going to get over my head. I want to continue to have money to invest in other properties. And so that's what I did. And so there was a 4-bedroom house in Boston, and they were asking $3,500 per month in rent. Now it was a nicer one, right? This is one that was in Jamaica Plains. If anybody that looks at this is from Boston, you know, Jamaica Plains or JP has come up a lot. And so what I ended up doing is I took one of the bigger rooms for my bedroom, right? And I took like the smallest room for my office because I had all this equipment and all this extra stuff that I needed to put in there for my medical device sales. And I rented the other 2 rooms out to roommates for $1,000 a piece. I think one of them was paying like $1,200 because he had the biggest room, and the other one was paying like $800 because he had the smallest room, right? So this is what had the roommates paying, and then I paid the additional $1,500, and then we split all the utilities. And so this allowed me to all in stay under that $1,500 route while still living pretty comfortably. And you're fresh out of college, like you're like 23, 24, 25, whatever, 24, 25. And so this is the time to make those kind of sacrifices, because later on, and you may be able to hear my son in the background, you're not going to want to do that. Like right now, if I had to go house hack like with somebody in the actual unit, that would be highly uncomfortable. And so my target was to get below that $2,000, and I was able to make that happen because I viewed a win as anything less than $2,000 per month, whether that be me purchasing something or me house hacking even with roommates. Now, about 2 years into that, so I renewed for 1 year, and then the second year, I had a lot of success in selling the medical devices. And so I ended up buying a condo and executing a very similar thing. I bought a condo for $400,000, right? And this is up in Boston. I bought it in Mattapan, which is up and coming area. It's like the last city that you have inside of Boston, quote unquote, proper before you leave the city. And it was a 3-bed, 2.5, right? 2.5. And I moved on up, right? So this was one where I want to say the mortgage was about $2,200 a month. And I had my roommate paying $1,200 a month, and roommate paid $1,200 per month. And so Niyi's cost was $1,000 per month. So I lowered my cost by another $500 while moving into ownership and lowering the amount of roommates from 2 roommates to 1 roommate with way more space in that condo. And this was even less than I was paying as a renter. I had ownership and a bigger space. And this house hack is where I lived in Boston until I actually moved away. And when I moved away, the property had gone up in value by a little over 10% in a short amount of time. I was able to sell it and use that down payment to then get into a different kind of house hack that was more of a luxury house hack in Atlanta. And so when I moved to Atlanta, I took the money that I made from the Boston property as well as my down payment because I got that back, and I bought a house in Atlanta in the East Atlanta neighborhood. And this house was amazing, right? This house was actually pretty awesome. I was making more money, but I still didn't want to pay more than say say $2,500 a month, right? And so my mortgage was a little over $4,000 a month. It was $4,200 for the mortgage, right? And it was a single family with the in-law suite. And this was at a time where I wanted to try out short-term rentals. Up until this point, the only thing I'd known or done for 5 years of real estate investing was long-term rentals, right? Usually small multifamilies. I did the condos and kind of just kept ramping it up from there. But at this point, I'd had so many friends that I'd met within real estate that were talking about this short-term rental thing. It was 2021 where these things were ripping. And so I said, you know what? Let me try it here. And the reason I'll try it here is because the rent that I could get for a 1 bed, 1 bath in this neighborhood, based on the details that I got, was roughly $1,500. Okay. And that $1,500 would still have me paying a little bit more than I wanted. It had me paying like $2,700 a month, but I really liked the house. I fell in love with the house. I'm not gonna lie. And my girlfriend at the time, now wife, fell in love with the house as well. So that was a bit of a contributing factor. But I said, you know what? Instead of taking the long-term rent of this, let me try this short-term rental thing. And if I can at least make this, I'll be happy. Now, what ended up happening is that short-term rental actually averaged for the 2.5 years that we lived there, $2,500 a month. And so it actually left me paying roughly $1,700 per month, right? Which was a major win. And it got me into the short-term rental game and added another tool to my tool belt in the fact that now I was like, hey, I can go buy in more expensive neighborhoods where homes are going to appreciate more and just short-term rent it. And so that's what helped me kind of get into that game and build out my whole portfolio there. And now we own 8 short-term rentals and manage 25 from a 1 bedroom up to a 10,000 square foot mansion. But long story short, this was another type of house hack. I would consider this more of a luxury house hack because that we could definitely do better on numbers, but we had like 4 beds, 3 baths to ourselves. And then we had 1 bed, 1 bath in an in-law suite basement that they had a completely separate entrance and we didn't see them, that was covering most of the mortgage. And so that was pretty amazing, right? And so the universal formula I would give you is that no matter what style of house that you're going for, whether it be a triplex, whether it be a roommate situation, whether it be a single family with the in-law suite or something else, the question you want to ask yourself is, can you pay less per month than what you're paying right now and own the property? And if you can do those, I consider that a successful house hack. We work with clients that are, paying $2,500 a month in rent, and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about getting an investment property. And the first question I always ask is, have you thought about doing a house hack for your first one? And is that a possibility? Because if you can do that for your first one, it not only allows you to play offense, but it allows you to play defense. Offensively, you're getting an investment property. You're putting the least amount down. And now you have, from a defensive standpoint, even less money that you're paying per month. So now you can save up for the next property and do it again if you're able. Now there's a compounding effect that can come if you do this consistently. One house hack per year gets really exciting. You can buy a new primary residence once per year. That means if you're willing to delay gratification for 3 to 5 years, you can build a serious portfolio. We have a client that has stayed consistent. We helped him buy a 4-unit back in 2023. He came back a little over a year later. I want to say it was like, 14, 15 months later, and we helped him buy another 4-unit. That's 8 units in 2 years, right? One client bought 2 fourplexes on the same street, and now he owns 8 units on the same block. And that portfolio has been his safety net through job volatility, right? He works in the tech industry. There was a time period after he got the second one where he was kind of laid off, right? Before he found more employment. It took about like 2 months, 3 months, and he wasn't sweating it at all. He actually took a vacation a little bit because his monthly cost was net zero. With these 2 units, he turned these 2 fourplexes. He turned 2 of the units, or maybe even 3 of the units, into short-term rentals, had the rest as long-term rentals. And so he was not only covering his cost of living, but getting an excess dollar amount to go and live and go and spend and do things with. And so that's one of the pieces that you can do. Now I want to redefine wealth, and I have a different way of looking at it, right? It's probably different than what you see on social media and what people are wearing and what people are flashing. And my definition of wealth is a simple question. If you were to stop working today, how many months would you survive? How long could you last before you had to go back? And the answer to that question, once it reaches infinity, to me, defines a wealthy person, right? Because if you are dependent on quote unquote active income that you have to be out there going to go get, and that's the only way you're going to make it month to month, then that's a different scale of wealthy. But if you're able to lower that monthly cost and build the other assets, like the friend I just mentioned, to where now he doesn't have a rental cost. He's got a surplus there and his other costs are minimal, that's a major win and you are wealthy. And so your largest expense by far is housing. Most people spend between, 30 and 50% of their check on it. Some people almost up to 60%. And a house hack can cut that in half and or eliminate it entirely. And so that $3,000 a month rent becomes $500 out of pocket. That's $20,000 in savings that would have lasted 6 months. Now it lasts years, right? If you're able to cut your expense from $3,000 a month to $500 out of pocket a month with a house hack, that $20,000 can last a lot of time if you have it inside of a savings account. And so I want to recap 3 things, right? You're already house hacking. You just don't own anything. Flip the script. Be the owner, not the tenant. The government makes it really easy to start. FHA loans, low down payments, seller paid closing costs. You don't need $50K to begin. I started with $5,000 and now that $5,000 turned into a 6-figure check 4 years later without me doing really anything. Define your win and stay consistent. Whether it's a triplex, a condo with a roommate, or a luxury home with a short-term rental, if you're paying less than you are now and you own the property, you are absolutely winning. If you want help finding your first house hack, my team at Ekabo Home covers Georgia, Florida, and Texas. Let's talk. Drop your email in the chat. I'll send the house hacking starter checklist for anybody that joined here live. And if you want to go get that, you can go to our website at ekabohome.com, EKABO home.com. Next week's session is going to be right here in the same arena. We will send out details on that soon. I hope everybody has an awesome rest of the week, and I look forward to being able to dive into more on future webinars. Thank you.
Join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern as we explore different types of investments that can fast track your path to financial independence.